everybody, Corey here, coming at you with another knife review. Today we are taking a look at the Benchmade Mini Adamas. If you're new around here, consider subscribing. I try to put out knife-related content on a regular basis. Now, I'm going to be honest with you guys. If I don't do size comparisons for a knife, it's usually because I don't like it, or I used to like it and I moved on. This one's interesting for me because I'm not particularly obsessed with this knife, but there's just something about it, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But first, let's put those size comparisons up on the screen for you guys. Here is the Mini Adamas next to a Spyderco PM2. Here it is next to a Benchmade Mini Crooked River. Here it is next to a ProTech Malibu. Here it is next to a Chris Reeve Large Sabenza. Here it is next to the Ontario Knives Ret number 2. And here it is next to the Off Grid Knives Scorpion. Okay, so before we jump into the review, let me know how you guys feel about the format of how this one goes. I used to do this thing where it was like, I got 3 things good and 3 things bad and blah, blah, blah. I don't know, whatever. I'm developing my taste as a knife collector, and I'm starting to just I know enough about knives to kind of just off the cuff my reviews at this point, so I'm sorry, that's probably really annoying. But I'm just going to kind of wing this one. I'm going to talk about how I felt about this knife, why I even have this knife. It might be confusing to some of you, and the good and the bad, and you know, whether or not I think this is a good buy for you guys, because this is a popular knife. I didn't really know how popular it was until I stumbled across it, but yeah, let's just talk about this. So, first of all, why do I have a Benchmade Mini Adamas? Because as many of you know, I'm not the biggest Benchmade fan. Well, long story short, I made a trade for this knife on Knife Swap along with another one, and someone basically gave me too good of a deal to pass up, and it was almost borderline shady. But he wanted to give me 2 knives for one of my knives, and I got the better end of that deal, in my humble opinion. And I said, all right, you know what? That's perfectly fine. So that's why the Practical Blade has another Benchmade right now, but this will be up for sale after the review. Hold on, it's not bad. It's not a bad knife. It just doesn't really have a place in my permanent collection. It's not really my taste, and if I was going to get one of these, it wouldn't be in the green and coyote brown. Now, that being said, this is a good looking knife, and I want to talk about that first. This actually surprised me. When I told Tyler over at Everyday EDC that I was picking one of these up, he was like, oh, you're gonna love that. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know. But you know, now that it's in my hand, it's interesting. It clearly has some problems, but there's something about this knife that just feels really good. And I'll start by just kind of pointing out, they did a really good job contouring these scales. This is actually a contoured scale. These are actually rounded. Because of that, it ends up being very comfortable in your hand. In my opinion, this is one of those interesting knives where Benchmade decided that they wanted to just go bonkers ham on all the jimping all over the place. Now, that being said, I think this serves the purpose that it's trying to serve here. All that jimping and all that business, this would be a really good outdoor knife. This would be a really good wear with gloves, take it with you, never lose grip of it. You know, it's nice in that regard. It does feel like it's meant to be a user. It also feels like just a tank. This one weighs a little bit more than I was expecting it to, and let's just real quick, I'll do the thing, I'll put some specs up over here so you can see that for a little bit. But just when I got it in my hand, I mean, you know, you see it's got the holes in it, right? You would expect it to maybe be, I don't know, a little bit lighter, but with the stainless steel liners all the way through, man, this thing feels substantial. And that's my main takeaway with this knife. That's what impressed me the most, is that even though it's a Mini Adamas, which for the record, I mean, this, you saw the size comparisons. This isn't exactly a mini anything. It's only mini relative to the full-size Adamas. it's really solid. It really feels like a tank knife, and something about this just inspires confidence. This really feels like the kind of knife where you're like, I am gonna beat the crap out of that knife. I'm gonna rely on that knife. This feels like, and I don't know, I'm talking to you about it, but this feels like the kind of knife that your dad would have. This feels like the kind of knife where your dad's like, give me my knife, and you hand him this, and he just starts wrecking copper wires with it or something. I'm probably being a little dramatic here, but it reminds me of the Benchmade Contigo review that I did. This feels like a man's knife. So that's how I have to that's what I have to say about it. That's how I feel about it. There are a few things that I don't like in terms of the ergos. The first is where the jimping ends. This right here never ever makes sense to me whenever any company puts that on a knife, because what it always ends up doing is the point just digs into your thumb, right? Unless you're all the way back here, which in my opinion isn't really comfortable. It kind of contorts your hand and it's hard to get your grip there. Or you relax it comfortably and you kind of rest on the jimping like that, so your thumb is upswept, but I just think they could do a little bit better there. That really kind of eats in your hand. Now, that being said, with what I've already said about this knife, saying it kind of feels like an outdoorsy knife, feels like one that you might use with gloves. If you did have gloves on, it would totally cushion your hand from that, and I don't think it would be a problem. But, if you're really going to town on this with raw hands, unless you've got some crazy calluses on your thumb, it might just get a little annoying. It's a hot spot for sure. In regards to everything else, the clip was a little interesting when I got this. Apparently this is how the clips come, and it might be a little hard to see. They come worn. Benchmade puts this kind of like worn, already scratched up finish on the clip, which I don't know, it's kind of cool. It makes you worry less about the clip. But just something to note, if you get one and the clip is already messed up, it's not because it's a bad knife, it's because apparently they just do that on these ones. But yeah, overall, very usable blade. It's not the best slicer in the world with the thick blade stock, and it doesn't come to a very aggressive tip or edge with the grind that they put on it, but it just kind of adds to the feeling of like, this is a knife that you're supposed to beat the crap out of. This is not a knife that you're supposed to open your mail with and do delicate work with. This is you need to rely on this knife for some BS when you go out that day. So overall, in terms of the good, I'm surprisingly satisfied. It's just better than I thought it would be. And, for a Benchmade, that says a lot for me, because everybody knows how I feel about Benchmades. Now, let's go on to the bad. The bad that I have right here, it's not really specific to this knife. It's got the typical Benchmade axis lock problems, which it is what it is at this point, right? Like, I think if you're a Benchmade fan, you know what you're getting into with the axis lock, and you know what you're getting into in terms of the risks that you're taking with the axis lock. On the mini Adamas, for some reason, when I started doing research on this knife, one of the first things that I noticed is that this had lock rock. And even for a Benchmade, lock rock feels kind of weird to me, but for some reason, when I started looking up what other people had to say about this knife, a lot of people say that the mini Adamas comes with a little bit of lock rock. I don't know how that's okay for anybody, but it seems to be relatively common on the mini Adamas, so that's something to consider. Does it make the knife functionally unusable? No, absolutely not. It's just one of those things where once you get over the $200 price point, you start going, could we work on that? Could we maybe, this is a lot of money. I'm sure you could figure it out. And that's kind of how I feel about it too. The other thing, like all the axis locks that I've personally dealt with, I can't get this to drop closed unless I introduce blade play. That's all there is to it. Of course, blade play isn't, I guess, the worst thing in the world. I feel like I'm trying to justify blade play on a $200 knife. You can get the axis lock to work without having blade play on this thing, but if you want it to do that, this thing that everybody gets all excited about, you're either going to have to really break it in, or you're just going to have to put up with some blade play. So that being said, though, all that does, it introduces some wiggle in the pivot. Unless you're batoning with this thing, which is not what I would recommend doing. I don't know. It annoys me because I'm a perfectionist, and I think it's inexcusable on a knife that's $200, but I think for most people, nobody's going to notice. And I think for Benchmade fans specifically, you just know that you kind of sometimes need a little bit of blade play to get the axis lock to drop like this. So, you know, not my cup of tea, but it's a Benchmade. That's it. For the record, it's centered, you know? So, I mean, that's pretty cool. But yeah, overall, I don't know, these retail for like $215. You could probably find them a little bit cheaper somewhere else. Even though it's got the lock rock, even though it's got the blade play, and yeah, it's got some hot spots, you know, all the jimping that I talked about, it feels a little excessive, but at the same time, it doesn't, right? It feels excessive from the perspective of like a Rat 2, right? It feels excessive from the perspective of I'm a normal guy who's just going to keep this in my pocket all day and do normal, easy crap with it. But from the perspective of what I think this was made for, which is just like a not survival knife, but you know, just beat the crap out of it, never worry about it breaking, blah blah blah. The jimping just kind of gives me that vibe of like, yes, it's in your hand, you're gonna need to grip it. So I don't know, really my only main complaint, if I really had to, you know, complain about something, the hot spot on top of where the jimping kind of goes into the blade. I just don't understand why anybody ever does this on their knives, because all it does is create a point for you to bury your thumb into and not feel good on. So other than that, you know, Axis Lock is going to do Axis Lock stuff. If you're a Benchmade fan and you like big boy knives and you want to know that a knife is in your pocket and you want to know that you can whip that thing out and just rip up anything you wanted to with it, I think you'll be satisfied this one. And honestly, even though the whole OD green, coyote brown isn't really my taste, I think it's executed really well. I think these colors go well together, and I think Benchmade did a pretty good job overall in terms of style and in terms of designing this knife in ways that align with what I presume are its intended uses, which are, you know, a little bit more hardcore than what you'd probably do with like a desk knife. But that's all I've got to say about the Benchmade Mini Adamas. More impressed than I usually am with the Benchmade. It's more comfortable. It's more everything than I thought it would be. So hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you all next time.